Leading a startup team, whether you're delivering a sugar rush, stocking coffee, or getting a regular delivery of snacks, Office Depot has solutions that fit every startup culture, from getting those first business cards and stationery to ordering fleece pullovers with your new logo. To learn how Office Depot and the California Technology Council have partnered to bring you savings on all of these startup essentials and more, go to californiatechnology.org/member benefits. I'm Daniel Levine, and this is the Bio Report. With 2016 drawing to a close and the biotech industry gearing up for the annual JPMorgan Healthcare Conference in San Francisco, we continued our holiday tradition of checking in with Adam Feuerstein, senior columnist for TheStreet.com. We spoke to Feuerstein about the year in biotech that was, the winners and losers of 2016, and what to look for at the JPMorgan Healthcare Conference and beyond. Adam, thanks for joining us.
Oh, thanks, Danny, for having me again. Yep.
This has become an annual tradition to end the year and kick off the new one with a conversation with you about the year that was and the year that will be. Normally, I wouldn't begin with your list of best and worst CEOs, but there was one pick that stood out for me on the best list. That was Ed Kay of Sarepta, which won a controversial approval for its Duchenne muscular dystrophy drug. Why Kay?
Well, I think as I mentioned, I think that just like the decision to approve Exondys was a controversial one. Probably choosing Ed Kay as one of the best biopharma CEOs of the year is also controversial. Simply I think that he just he got the drug over the finish line. And it was a difficult process. It was a difficult review. Obviously, there was a lot of controversy, like we said, and he delivered on what he was supposed to do, and which was get that drug approved and make it available to the Duchenne patients who need it. We can sort of debate, whether or not that was appropriate or not, and how the launch has gone, and all those things. But it just seemed to me like he was an appropriate selection for that list.
Well, it was an interesting moment for the FDA. While the rare disease patient community viewed it as a victory, I'm not so sure about that. Documents show that there was great dissension in the ranks at FDA, and Woodcock muscled the approval through. While some people view this as the FDA being more responsive to the patient community, do you think there'll be pushback from staff going forward, raising barriers, or whether this reflects what an FDA under Trump may look like, where efficacy is just not that important?
Well, those are all great questions. I don't know if I have any answers for you. I think it really is kind of remains to be seen. Is probably the best thing to say. I think Woodcock and others at the FDA have kind of called out the Exondys decision and review as sort of a one-off. That they don't see it as precedent setting. Which means that if a company if it was another company that came to the FDA with the sort of same set of circumstances, that that decision might not be the same, right? So that it's not like anybody can come to the FDA now and say, oh, you approve Sarepta, you need to approve our drug. Now, again, we have to see how that goes, right? And so in the next year or two or whatever, we'll see how that goes. Again, the critics look at it differently, right? And people who have criticized what John Woodcock did, they think that this is a sort of a dumbing down of the approval standards, and it sets a bad precedent. So, I can understand both sides, but we'll have to see how it goes.
Well, we've got a new administration coming in. What do you think this is going to mean for the biopharmaceutical industry? We've got PDUFA coming up, healthcare re-reform on the table. And does the threat of U.S. government action on drug pricing go away or intensify?
I think that there's still a lot of uncertainty about all of those questions, which is one of the reasons why I can't say that I'm super bullish about going into 2017 if we're sort of looking at stock prices, which is kind of what I look at. We sort of 2016 was a bad year for biotech stocks because of a lot of concern about drug pricing and what the government may or may not do. Now we're moving into 2017, and it seems like there's a mixed bag, right? It seems like we have some new legislation that might sort of open up the FDA a little bit more, make drug approvals a little bit easier in certain circumstances. But we also have a lot of bipartisan support for doing something about drug pricing. Now, what that is, no one really knows yet. There's still a lot of talk about it. And we've got Trump, who he's kind of been all over the place about it. We don't really know who he hasn't chosen an FDA chief yet. There's going to be they're going to try to repeal Obamacare, replace it with we don't know yet. So I think there's so much uncertainty, and uncertainty is not necessarily a good thing. Right?
Well, this is an industry that does not like uncertainty.
Yeah, people do not like uncertainty. So I think that all these questions, we sort of go into January, we go into 2017 not knowing what's going to happen, and that's a problem. I mean, that's kind of an overhang, it's sort of a dark cloud that sort of sits over everybody until we sort of figure out what actually will happen.
So 2016, I think people were expecting a major break in the glass ceiling. And in fact, the glass ceiling did break. You went with Elizabeth Holmes as your first female worst CEO of the year, the CEO of Theranos. Why Elizabeth Holmes?
Well, I just, it seemed like a no-brainer, right? That was just an easy pick. You just have to sort of look at how, this is this blood diagnostic company that was kind of heralded as kind of the Silicon Valley unicorn that was going to revolutionize the blood testing business. And, what it turns out, obviously, because of, a lot of the intrepid reporting of John Carreyrou at the Wall Street Journal, did some great reporting this year on Theranos. And the story seems to have been just a mirage, that there really wasn't a lot of there when it came to Theranos. And, more than that, there was, seems like a lot covering up of bad things that were going on behind the scenes. And so, for all those reasons, Elizabeth Holmes was probably one of the easier picks of worst CEO that I've done. I mean, I've been doing this for a long time now, and it was one of those years where you could have gone a lot of ways. There were a lot of candidates out there for worst CEO of 2016, but she was sort of, she was definitely at the top.
It really has been a remarkable story where, shrouded in secrecy with a board of really Washington heavyweights. It looked like some kind of Silicon Valley superstar. How do you explain how this company got away with what it did for as long as it did?
Well, I think you sort of nailed it, right? I mean, I think they sort of wowed everybody with this, with this advisory board and the amount of money they had raised, and it was a compelling story. Stanford University dropout who comes up with this idea and gets all this funding, and how could someone like that with so much sort of star power behind her, how could it not work? But I think it goes to show you that healthcare technology, healthcare it's not like coming up with Facebook. It's there. Silicon Valley has this idea that we just sort of apply technology to everything, and we can fix all the problems of the world. And there are some things that are more difficult, and science is hard. You and I, we sort of we're in the biotech world and the drug development world, and that even the best companies can't figure stuff out, and that failure is sort of endemic to the world that we inhabit here, in the drug and biotech world. And Silicon Valley maybe learned that lesson the hard way when it comes to Theranos.
So speaking of endemic failure, it strikes me as I thought about 2016 that it was a year that seemed more defined by failure than success, that there really weren't a large number of exciting drug approvals, and there were much more notable failures. What's your take on the year in terms of drug approvals and clinical failures?
Well, I think the drug approval stuff. I can't. I mean, you're right. I don't think there was there wasn't really a breakthrough
T-centric, maybe?
drug, for lack of a better term, that sort of that in 2016. I think a lot of that, we sort of put, obviously you sort of look at the calendar year, things are cyclical. Drug approvals are cyclical, right? I mean, it depends on when companies apply for approval and when they're actually approved. So, like, the number of drug approvals per year is always going to fluctuate, and so it's hard to look at sort of 1 year compared to another year to say, oh, it's down and why is it down? But I agree with you that there really wasn't like a huge compelling drug approval this year, maybe as opposed to years past. More maybe just sort of incremental kind of things this year. And failure, anytime a sort of an industry is under the gun, like it was sort of under this cloud this year, which we really from the get go, right, from like January 1st, 2016, it seemed like biotech, it was just not going to be biotech's year, right? It was just a bad year from the beginning. So when you have a year like that, there's very little margin of error, and kind of failures and setbacks are sort of magnified in that kind of year, right? They're just, you can't really brush them off.
Well, Lilly's Alzheimer's drug failure has now shifted the attention to Biogen. Any reason to think they will fare differently with their Alzheimer's drug?
It's a great question. It's one of those things where that debate will go through 2017, because I don't think we're going to get data on that, really definitive data, until 2018 at the earliest. So that's a debate we can probably have the same conversation a year from now. Again, you look at the data and you say, got it. You look at the Lilly data and you say, look, another beta amyloid drug fails. A long list of them have failed. So why should the Biogen drug be any different? But of course, there's always some sort of scientific plausibility. People look at that and say, this drug will be different. This one gets into the brain. This one is removing plaques from the brain, whereas Lilly's didn't, and therefore it has a better shot of working. That's kind of the conclusion that came out of the Alzheimer's meeting that occurred just a little bit early this month. That's a debate. I think the debate will just rage on until we get those data from Biogen. Again, we have to wait a little while for it, but Alzheimer's is one of those diseases where there's such an unmet medical need for a drug that can be truly disease modifying. That it's going to be a target that biotechs and pharmaceutical companies will just always go after. It's such a big, there's such a need there for something.
Well, what about cancer immunotherapies? Will this be the big story in 2017? Are there other therapeutic categories you think will excite investors?
Yeah, cancer immunotherapy, has been and will remain a big topic. Something that people focus on a lot. I mean, I think we're sort of getting out of the sort of monotherapy phase of cancer immunotherapy, and we're moving rapidly into sort of combinations of cancer immunotherapies to see how those work. So I think we're going to get a lot more data. In 2017 will be a big year for combination therapies. So, AstraZeneca and Roche and Merck and Bristol Myers, all sort of the big names in cancer immunotherapy, they're all working on combinations of cancer immunotherapies to see if we can boost the response, because the patients who respond to immunotherapies, cancer patients who respond to them, respond very well, but it's still a minority of patients that respond to these therapies. So what we really need to do is to broaden out the response. We need to get more patients responding and responding longer. So the idea is, can we, instead of using one drug, can we use two drugs? Very simplistically. And we're going to get, particularly in lung cancer, which is the biggest commercial market for cancer drugs, we're going to get, 2017 is a big year for combination therapies, combination cancer immunotherapies in lung cancer.
Gilead seems to have lost some of its shine in 2016. The company is facing declining revenue. Investors don't see growth coming from its pipeline. Are we going to see Gilead make a major acquisition in 2017?
I think we've been talking about this one for like 2 years now. You kind of hope so in some way. Gilead's it's one of those really befuddling stories. It's such a great company that has sort of, in some ways, sort of a victim of its own success because, revenues and earnings just accelerated so much when the hepatitis C drugs were first approved. They were treating so many patients, and they, now that revenue is sort of on the decline, investors are, it's the classic, what have you done for me lately, right? And so people sort of want to see them come up with something that will, kind of a road, sort of a pathway to a return to growth again. And it doesn't seem like it's coming from Gilead's internal pipeline. I mean, they did not have a good year when it comes to their internal R&D this year, outside of hepatitis C and HIV, which is their core strength. Nothing else really sort of captured investors' attention. There really did seem to be a sort of a blockbuster sort of product coming out of their own internal R&D. So that naturally leads people to sort of want them to acquire something, and it hasn't happened. So, these are the kind of questions that, when we sit down, everyone sits down at JPMorgan, in January. Those will be the questions that the Gilead executives get, right? Like, who are you going to buy? When are you going to buy something? What are you going to do? And obviously, they've been faced with these questions, for countless times already, and we'll have to see what happens.
Well, we've got a new CEO at Biogen. We've got an opening at Alexion. Any thoughts on leadership changes at the big biotechs?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of there's been a good amount of turnover here. Biogen went with an internal candidate. They went with their chief commercial officer, promoted him to the CEO role. There's sort of mixed views about that, what that meant. Did that mean that, they looked externally and nobody wanted the job or they couldn't find anybody? Biogen has sort of been a perennial sort of take out candidate. They might be acquired. What does this mean? Alexion, same kind of issue. Look, they still haven't filed their Q for the third quarter. The company and sort of its supporters seem to think that, the executive turnover there, the CEO leaving, sort of is unrelated to some of these other issues that are going on at Alexion. We'll just have to see who they get, to run the company as on a full-time basis. But these are jobs. I mean, like, you think about it, like big cap biotech CEOs. I mean, that's a good job, and those are scarce jobs, and you kind of want to get some all-star talent into those roles.
So a year ago, when you're coming out of JPMorgan, the headline on your story read, "A lack of news and buzz at JPM 16 sinks biotech stocks."
Yeah.
What's the headline going to be this year?
Well, I just hope there's a lot more news. I mean, I feel like at least going in this year, expectations are a lot lower, right? We've had, we're sort of coming out of this pretty horrible year. Everyone is happy that 2016 is over. So you got to think that even if there's just kind of even a sort of a small amount of news flow, deal flow, some good news that starts the year, that will get people sort of set on a more positive, optimistic mindset for 2017. Now, I don't think that, like, some of the structural things that we talked about earlier are necessarily going to go away, but you kind of want to see a little bit more progress made. And that was the problem last year, was that we were all sitting around at JPMorgan, in January 2016, and literally nothing happened. I mean, there was just no big news, no deals, no buyouts, no acquisitions, nothing. So that just did not make for a very this didn't make for a good meeting. So this year, hopefully, I hope that companies have banked some good news, stuff that I can write about, on that Monday morning. We all sort of wake up super early on the Monday morning at JPMorgan, and I open my computer and I'm like, all right, bring me the news. Where is it? So I hope that happens this year. If anyone's out there listening who has news, put it out.
Well, with a nod to Meg Terrell, let me say Adam Feuerstein, whose name I have mispronounced for many years. Adam Feuerstein, senior columnist for TheStreet.com. Adam, thanks as always, and happy and healthy 2017.
Happy holidays, Daddy. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. The Bio Report is a production of the Levine Media Group. To automatically download this podcast each week, Subscribe to our RSS feed or through iTunes or other podcast manager. To join our mailing list, go to levinemediagroup.com. We'd love to hear from you. If you want to drop us a line or are interested in sponsoring this podcast, send an email to danny@levinemediagroup.com. Special thanks to Jonah Levine, who composed our theme music, and the Jonah Levine Collective, which performs it.